Supreme Court sides with internet provider in billion-dollar copyright case. For turning a blind eye while its customers illegally downloaded music. Now the Supreme Court has wiped that verdict away, ruling unanimously that internet providers cannot be held responsible for what their customers do online, even when they know it's happening. The decision protects companies like Cox, but leaves music companies and other copyright holders with few practical ways to stop mass piracy. But the labels argued that was not enough. A jury agreed and ordered Cox to pay over $1 billion. A federal appeals court upheld the verdict. The Supreme Court then reversed it, with all 9 justices agreeing Cox should not be held liable. It could not be said to have intended to help that specific person do it.